I recently had a chance to see the brand new film Wolfman from Universal and Blumhouse, and I have some thoughts on it. Overall, I did like the film, though I do think that it is not as strong and as layered as something like Invisible Man. And I bring this up because both films are directed by Leigh Whanell. With Invisible Man, I felt like there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of thrill and scares, but also the movie just had a really powerful message as well. I think Wolfman has some really great visual moments, and I think the way that he portrays how Blake transitions from man to Wolfman is really impressive. There are some really great visual and audible cues to show us the transition process into the Wolfman, and honestly, I may have liked those moments more so than the action, than the emotion, and some of the tragedy in the movie. And the movie is pretty tragic. The movie's built upon a relationship of a family, a husband, wife, and daughter, that has its roots sown in the relationship between Blake and his father. I do think that the movie is a little too light on how it portrays his father, because I think the movie's trying to tell us that his father may have been slightly verbally abusive. I don't think it leans into physically abusive, but they definitely play him as a tough as nails dad. And unfortunately, I think for kids who grew up in the 80s and 90s, it feels very trauma light. And I'm not saying that I need to see the trauma in full force, but I think if you're really trying to sell me on the idea that this character went through trauma as a child, you need to hit it just a little bit harder. And that kind of makes me feel like the emotional investment for me as an audience member just isn't there. I wanted to be pulled in more emotionally. I wanted to care about the characters much more than I did, and I really wanted to root for these characters and root for their relationship. I think ultimately I walked out of this movie feeling like it was a tragic story because of the relationship between all the characters, but I wasn't as emotionally moved like I was with Invisible Man. That film does an incredible job showing you that Adrian is a real threat to Cecilia, her livelihood, and her friendships. I definitely don't think it's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I really appreciate the really tight 100-minute runtime. I think it works best when you get to see the transition from man to wolf, the visual and audible cues, and a lot of the practical effects as well. There are some really good fight scenes that build the tension really well, and I think the payoff at the end is really good, but I would have just loved to have been more emotionally invested, like I've been with other previous films. If Blumhouse and Universal decided to do more of these movies with Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and so on and so on and so on, I do think that Leigh Whanell is a really great candidate to potentially direct all of these movies, but in order to do so, they will have to do another pass on some of these scripts because I want them to feel like Invisible Man in terms of my emotional connection as an audience member. But if you got a chance to see the movie, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you thought, and whether or not you'd like to see more of these Universal monster movies brought back to life.
Heroes Reforged is gonna react. Heroes Reforged is gonna review. Heroes Reforged is gonna discuss. That's why we are watching.